Okay, hello everyone. I hope you're all doing well. Okay, so before I start, all right, so I have a little cough. Well, it's not a cough that is persistent, but I there's this hot chocolate in my school, and anytime I drink it, I start to cough. I'm not sure why. So if you hear me coughing, that's because of why, but I'll try my best to keep it down. Okay. All right. So the next program in chapter seven. Sorry. The next program in chapter seven is number analysis class. All right, so write a class with a constructor that accepts a file name as its argument. Assume the file contains a series of numbers, each written on a separate line. The class should read the content of the file into an array and then displays the following data. All right, so the lowest number in the array, the highest number in the array, the total of the numbers in the array, and then the average of the numbers in the array. All right, so it says this chapter's source code folder available at this URL contains a text file named numbers.txt. This file contains 12 random numbers. Write a program that tests the class by using this file. All right, so I bought the book. I bought Tony Gaddis' book from Amazon, and for some reason I didn't get access to this. But the good thing is we can create a text file and put in 12 random numbers, right? It says it contains 12 random numbers. The good thing is we can put in 12 random numbers and use it for this program. But when I was reading through this question and I was trying to, plan it all in my head, if we create the program to work with, let's say, an array, okay, because we are supposed to read the numbers in the file into an array, right? Yep, right here. If we do that and later on we use another file that contains, let's say, 14 items. So we basically let's say we start the program with a file that contains 12 numbers. If we pull the numbers into an array, okay, we declare the array to accept 12 numbers. Later on, if we change the file to a file that contains 14 numbers, we're going to get an error, right? Because we can't pull all the 14 numbers from the file and fit it in a 12 number array. So let's actually make it even better. Let's create the program in such a way that it doesn't matter how many elements or how many numbers are in the file, whether there are 2 or 1,000 or 50. Let's create the program in that way so that we can use any file, and the program will automatically know how many numbers are in the file, declare the array to hold that many numbers, and then work with it that way, okay? All right, so let's start. I'm going to go ahead and create the class. So it's going to be a public class. So basically, we're going to create two files. The first one is going to be the class itself, and then the next one is going to be the program that's going to test this class. All right, we're supposed to write a class with a constructor. All right, so let's start with the class. So public class, now we need to give it a name. Now the name of the class has to be the same as the name of your file when you're saving it, okay? But I'm going to call this number analysis. By convention, we capitalize it, so number analysis. We capitalize class names. All right, so the next thing, let's see. So write a class with a constructor that accepts a file name as its argument. So let's start with a constructor because that's the first thing I read over here. All right. I don't know what's in this hot chocolate, but every time I try it, I cough. I don't know. I stopped for a while, and today I just drank it by accident. Anyway. All right, so let's start with the constructor. Now, with the constructor, it's just like a method, right? The only thing is it doesn't have it doesn't have a keyword static, right? It's just the access specifier, which is public or private. It's going to be a public constructor because that's what the main method or the main program is going to use to basically instantiate an object from this class. It's going to be public, no keyword static, no return type. It doesn't have a return type because we do not call this method ourselves. So this method is called automatically when someone tries to create an object from this class. So because of that, we don't specify a return type. It's just an access specifier and then the name of the constructor. Now the name of the constructor has to be the same as the name of the class. All right, so in this case, it's going to be public number analysis. It has to be the same as the name of the class. Apart from that, it looks just like a regular method, right? Let's just shift this down a little bit. It just doesn't have a return type and no keyword static. All right, so it says write a class with a constructor that accepts a file name as its argument. So that means we need to, if it's going to accept a file name, we need to define a parameter here, okay, for the file name. The file name is going to be a string, so that means that we need to declare our parameter as a string. So string I'm going to call this file name of file. I like to name my variables. I like to name my variables with long names. I'm sure some of you know by now, but you can name it whatever you want, as long as it makes sense to you. I just like to keep mine long. Okay, I just want it to be clear. So string file name or file to read from, right? This is going to be the file name the user is going to provide. Okay, so now when the user provides us this file name, what we need to do is try to open this file. Okay, so let's do that. By doing that, we need to create a file object, and if we're going to use any file object, then we need to also make sure that we import the classes or the class that is going to allow us to use the file object. And so up here, I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to import java.io, so the asterisk sign, semicolon. So basically all I'm doing is I'm importing all the classes, the asterisk means all the classes located in the java.io package, located in the Java API. And by doing that, now I have access to the classes, in the java.io package, to be able to create a file. All right, so I'm going to create over here. Absolutely, let's hold on 1 second here. Well, so we need to create a file, basically a file object, right? So as a private field, let's go up here. As a private field, I'm going to declare a class type variable of type file. I'm going to declare a class type variable. But if it's going to be a field, then it's going to be a private field. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. It's going to be private because I don't want code outside of this class to be able to access this field, directly. I want code outside of this class to be able to use public methods we are going to define later in our class to be able to access any field from this class. That's why I'm making our field private. Okay, so I'm going to declare a private field. Okay, it's going to be a class type variable of the file type, and I'm going to call it. Let's call this file to read from. This is going to be the file to read from. So all I've done here is declare a class type variable of type file. I haven't created an object yet. This is later on going to hold a file object. So down here, once the person has provided us the name, anyone who tries to create an object from this class, once they provided us the name, we need to try to open a file. We have it here, as a field. And we know the name of it is file to read from. So now we can use that file to read from class type variable. Now let's go ahead and this is just a class type variable. Now we have to go ahead and create a file object. So I'm going to create a new file object. And if you're creating a new file object, we need to specify the file name of the file, which happens to be what this is, because whoever calls this constructor needs to provide that file name. So I'm going to copy it and paste it here. By doing this file to read class type variable refers to our file. So we have our file. Okay, now the file class has a method called exist that allows us to check to see if this file exists, right? Because the user can give us a file that doesn't exist, right? If it doesn't exist, then we're going to get an error, right? So we need to basically check to make sure this file exists before we go ahead and try to read from it. Otherwise, our program will be a mess. So the way I want this to work is I'm going to keep on asking the user to type in a valid file name, okay, until they type in a file that exists. If they don't type in a file that exists, I'll keep on asking them, which means I need to use a while loop. I'm going to use a while loop here. I'm going to call a while loop and say that, let's see. Okay, so I'm going to say while file to read from, okay, does not exist. I'm going to place an exclamation sign in front of it. So what this reads is while file to read from does not exist, and this is a method here. So okay, the file class has this method. Okay, it's going to return true if the file exists or return false if the file does not exist. But I'm saying over here while it does not exist. So if it does not exist, first of all, let's display a message to the user telling the user that this particular file does not exist, so they should type in another file name. So we're going to say system.out.println we can actually use the name of the file. We can say we can use it in our print statement and say file name. Let me copy this, it's too long. I like to create long variables and now I'm suffering. All right, so we're going to say this file, okay, we're going to concatenate it with a string does not exist. Please type in a valid file name, something like this. So if we ask the user to type in a valid file name, that means we need to also allow them to be able to type in a new value, and we need some kind of mechanism to allow the user to type in that. Well, we can use the JOption pane, or we can use a scanner class. Let's go ahead and use a scanner class. In order to use a scanner class, you need to import we need to use a scanner object, and in order to use a scanner object, we need to import the scanner class. So I'm going to do that right below this. So I'm going to import java.util.scanner. All I'm doing is I'm importing the scanner class located in the java.util package, located in the Java API. Now that I have the scanner class, I need to create a scanner object, so I can use that to ask the user to enter a value, basically a new file name, because we need it here. If we've asked them to type in a valid file name, we need to allow them to type. So I'm going to create as a private field again. As a private field, not in our constructor, but as a private field here. Again, private because I don't want code outside of this class to be able to access this file directly. I don't want it to be able to change it or even do anything with it directly. I want it to use public methods we're going to declare later on in this class to be able to do that, but not directly. And that's why they are private fields. All right, so we need a scanner object. So I'm going to declare a scanner class type variable that is later going to hold a scanner object. So a variable of scanner type, and I'm going to call it keyboard, right? Because this is going to be used to read from the keyboard. That's it. I've declared the variable, and this variable is going to be used to hold a scanner object. All right, so now we can go ahead and create a scanner object here, right? We have the variable keyboard. Now I'm going to go ahead and create a scanner object. It's going to be equal to new scanner object. Now we need to specify the input, where we're going to read from. System.in refers to the keyboard. So this is going to allow us to accept byte info from the keyboard, from the user, and then we're going to use the methods in the scanner class to be able to convert this byte info to whatever data type we want to, whether it's doubles or floats or whatever we want them to. All right, so now that we have our scanner object, we can use that to prompt for information. So keyboard.next, I'm going to call keyboard.next line. Now keyboard.next line is going to basically pop up some kind of text box and allow the user to type in something, right? Now whatever the user types is going to be returned as a string. So if the user types in a new file name, we need a place to store that, right? So I'm not going to declare a new variable. I'm going to, because there's a value in this variable, which is file name of file to read from. That's what the user initially passed to the constructor when they tried to create an object from this class. I'm going to replace it because that file doesn't exist. That file is invalid. So I'm going to replace whatever is stored in that variable with whatever the user is about to type, the new value the user is about to type, right? I'm going to replace it. So whatever the user types is going to return as a string, and I'm going to store that string in this variable. I'm replacing it with, I'm replacing whatever was stored in there with this new value the user has typed. Now that we have this new value, we need to try to represent or try to open that file, this particular file, okay, because it has a new file name. So down here, I'm going to repeat the process again. We ask the user to type in a new value. We get the new value. Let's try to create the file again, basically. Open the file again. It's not create, sorry. Open the file again. We have our file object, right? And so file to read from, that's our file object, which we've already created. It's going to be equal to, I'm now creating a new file object. It's equal to a new file object, okay, and I need to pass in a new file name, which is file name or file to read from. So we have our file. Now it's going to check to see if the file exists. If the file does not exist, if it does not exist, it's going to repeat the process again. It's going to prompt out this error message and allow the user to type in the value again. It's going to prompt out an error message, allow the user to type in again, basically try to open the file and check to see if the file exists. Okay, check to see if the file does not exist. If the file does not exist, it's basically going to repeat the process again. If the file exists, however, it's going to exit this while loop and continue down below. All right, so if the file exists, that means that we can now try to read from it, right? In order to read from it, we have to use a scanner class again, right? We've already imported our scanner class, but we need a different scanner object to be able to read from this file. So I'm going to again declare as a private field another scanner object. Private field, okay, I'm going to now declare a class type variable. Just declaring a class type variable. I'm not going to create an object yet. I'm declaring a class type variable as a private field. And I'm going to call it, let's see, I'm going to call this, because really we are going to use this kind of scanner to read from this file that exists, after going through this while loop, or after getting past this while loop. So I'm going to call it input file. Input file. An input file is basically the file that we've confirmed exists. Okay, we are using this kind of class to basically read from it. The input file is going to represent that file, that file that exists. All right, so I've created that class type variable, and down here, once we've checked to see the file, once basically the code has bypassed this while loop, that means the file exists. So I'm going to represent that file, that exists. We're going to use a scanner class to try to read from that file. So input file is going to be called to a new scanner object. You have to create a new scanner object to be able to read from it. But this time around, the input is not from the keyboard. The input is from the file that exists, which is file to read from. We've confirmed it exists, so now let's use the scanner class to try to read from it. And this is what's going to keep track. This input file class type variable of type scanner. So we'll have input file here. All right, so if we have input file, then let's see, the next thing we have to do is to initialize. Okay, basically we need an array, right? Because we are ready to read from it now. We have our, scanner object to be able to read from this file. But the question wants us to, see the class should read the contents of the file into an array, okay? And then it displays the following data. So the first thing we need to do is make sure we move the content of this file into an array. We're ready to read from it. We actually don't have the array. So we need to create the array. As a private field again, I'm going to create the array. So private. All right, so it said over here, the class, it contains, let's see, it contains a series of numbers. Now we can use integers, we can use floats, right? But let's use float, right? Because even with the integers, sometimes when you try to find the average of them, you may end up with a float. So, let's use float just to keep things, because it's logical that way. So we're going to create the array to hold double, right? So it's going to be a double array. So private double array, right? Double array. And I'm going to call it numbers. All I've done is I've created basically a variable, an array called numbers, or basically a variable called numbers that's going to hold, it's basically an array. Sorry, it's basically an array that's going to hold double numbers. So, but the thing is, we've just created a variable for it, but we haven't really created the array itself. I've basically declared a variable here that's going to hold an array. Yes, that's what I meant to say. So we need to now create the array. But when you are creating the array itself, you need to also specify how many numbers the array is going to hold. You need to specify that. But the thing is, we don't know. We can't manually type in. The question said 12, but I wanted us to create the program in such a way that it doesn't matter how many numbers are in the file. Because if we stick with 12, just like I said, later on when we use a file that contains 14 numbers or 20 numbers, the program will kind of crash because we can't fit 20 numbers in an array that only contains 12 numbers. So let's make the program dynamic such that it automatically knows how many numbers are in the file. So before we even go ahead to initialize the array, to declare the array, create the array, and set the size of the array. Before we go ahead and set the size of the array, we need to know how many numbers are in the file. We can read from it now. So I want us to create a method in this class. That when we call it, it's going to return how many numbers are in the file, right? So let's do that. This is our constructor so far. Right above our constructor, I'm going to create a method that's going to do that for us. It's going to get how many numbers are in the file. All right. So this is going to be an instance method. Okay. Instance methods do not have the keyword static. Well, instance methods are basically methods that work directly on the fields of a class. And instance methods don't have the keyword static. For now, just know that later on, in future chapters, we'll talk more about it. But just know what we're about to create is an instance method. Instance methods don't have the keyword static, and they are methods that work directly on the fields of a class. Okay, and because this method is going to work on the field of a class, it's going to be an instance method. So it works just like a regular method, no keyword static. We need to specify the access. In this case, it's going to be a public. We need to specify the return type. It has no keyword static. So what we are doing is we are getting how many numbers are stored in the file. So this is going to be an integer number, right? It's going to be either 10 numbers, 2 numbers. It's not a float, an integer. So the return type is going to be an int. And now we need to give it a name. I'm going to call this get number of. It's going to be a funny name. Get number of numbers, right, in file. It's a long name. I know my variable names and method names are long, but like I said, change it to what makes sense to you. All right, so is this going to accept any argument? I don't think so. So we don't have to define any parameters for now. What we want to do is first we want to count, okay, how many numbers are in the file. So I'm going to declare a variable. It's going to be an int variable that's going to keep track of that for us. That's going to accumulate that for us. So int, I'm going to call it number of numbers in file. We can even call it numbers file. I know that it's getting long, but number of numbers in, let's see, get number of numbers in file. Let's just keep it simple. Number of numbers in file. All right. I don't know why I put that parenthesis over there. All right, so it's going to be a regular variable, int number of numbers in file. Let's initialize it to 0. Initially, it's 0, right? And what we are going to do is we're going to create a while loop. Let's see here. Yeah, we're going to create a while loop because we've initialized this input file. Okay, before that, we will call this method below this line here. Okay, but so just know that because we've already initialized this input file, we can use it to read from the file, right? We can read from the file. All right, so the scanner class has a method called hasNext, okay, and hasNext will return true if the file has a line. So basically, when you try to read from a file, by default it has a read position of the first line. When you call hasNext, it checks to see if on that line there's something there. If there's something there, it's going to basically return true if there's something there. If there's something there, and you call, let's say, a method to read from that that line, the read position will move on to the next line. If you call hasNext again, it's going to check that next line to see if there's something there. If there's something there, it returns true. If you make a call, let's say next double, or in this case next double, it's going to read that line and adjust the read position to the next line. So hasNext only checks to see if that line has something, okay, has content. But in order to force the read position to move, you have to make a call to a method, either a next double or one of the methods in the scanner class before it moves. Otherwise, hasNext will still stay there. So if you call hasNext as many times, it will still stay there. Basically, it will still keep checking that same line until you've made a call to a method, let's say next double or next int or something like that. So that's very important. If you think has next, will adjust the read position it won't. It will just keep checking the same line until you've made a call to a method. So what we want to do is we declare this variable, store 0. I'm going to create the while loop, and I'll explain here. All right, so basically while our input file, because we are using that's our scanner object that we are using to read from the file that exists, file to read from. All right, so while input file dot has next, so we start, the read position is at the top. While it has something, while it has something there on that line, remember, if we don't call a method like next double or something like something related to one of the methods in the scanner class, if we don't call that method, that read position won't adjust. Has next alone is not enough. Okay. While it has next, we want to read that line, right? But in this case, we are only counting. We don't want that number. So we can read that line and throw it away, right? We just want to read that line so the read position will adjust to the next line. We check to see if there's something there. Read that line. Basically, we want to keep track of how many lines there are. So what we want to do is we want to make a call to input file dot next double, right? Because we have doubles stored in this file. So input file dot next double is basically going to read, okay, the double on that line, basically that double number on that line. It's going to read it, and it's going to return it to us. So basically, if it's returning it to us, we need a place to store it. But actually, in this method, in this while loop here, we don't need it. We just want the read position to adjust, so we can keep counting. So let's throw this out. Once it reads that number from the file on that line, we throw it away. We don't care. But what we've achieved is that the read position has adjusted to the next line. If it's adjusted to the next line, that means we've confirmed that the line above it is one line, so we can keep track of it by counting. So what we want to do here, once we've read that line and adjusted the read position to the next line, we keep track of it, we count. So we add 1 to number of numbers in file. All right, so number of numbers in file is going to be equal to what's already stored in number of numbers in file plus 1. So number of numbers in file is 0. We add 1 to it. The whole thing becomes 1. We store 1 in number of numbers in file. We check again. The while loop checks again, right, to see if it has an X, because the read position has already been adjusted to the second line. The second line, if it contains something, we read that second line, but we don't use it. We just want to force the read position to move to the next line. So we read it, and it moves the read position to the next line. If it moves to the next line, then we've confirmed that there's a second line. So we add 1 to number of numbers in file. We're basically keeping track of how many numbers are in that file. If it reaches the end of the file, has next will return true. So this while loop will exit. Okay. So we add 1 to number of numbers in the file, and then we keep on the process. By the time we are done, number of numbers in the file will contain how many numbers are in the file. Right? And then when we are done, we return this variable, which is number of numbers in file, because we declared this method to return an int. So we return this variable because it will contain the number of numbers in the file. But anytime you're done using the file, okay, reading from the file, you need to close it, right? So I'm going to go ahead and close it here. I'm going to close this input file. We're going to encounter some problems, but I'll explain as we go. So input file dot close, you call the close method this way. It closes the file, and then it returns the number of numbers in file right here. Okay,